35 years ago, the lives of two men intersected on the USS Midway during the fall of Saigon. Their paths were very different. One man was fleeing from the Vietnam War, and the other was helping to save him. To Zung Lee, who was 18 at the time, it is a story of sorrow for what was left behind and of hope for a promising future. For Navy Commander Vern Jumper, it is a tale of heroism, one that involved saving thousands of refugees during what was known as Operation Frequent Wind, the largest helicopter evacuation in U.S. history. Little did the men know that they would both end up in San Diego, living just miles apart, sharing a piece of history that forever changed their lives. The story begins on April 28, 1975 in Saigon. Zung Lee and his family, like thousands of Vietnamese, were preparing to evacuate their home country as North Vietnam invaded the South.
Bad news came when dawn came, because when dawn came, it turns out that there are sporadic rockets falling into the airport. We don't know where, but the latest news that the plane cannot land, so there's no more plane. And then I remember that when people were saying that, then there's really a sense of panic. I mean, I look around and people are crying, and because essentially somebody would say very loud that the Americans are gone.
About 25 miles off the coast of Saigon sat American Vern Jumper, air boss of the USS Midway. He was preparing his crew for the launch of 10 H-53 helicopters, which would be used instead of airplanes to rescue the refugees.
On the 29th is when it actually started. It was around noontime, and we got the word to start launching the H-53s.
At about maybe 11 or so, because I know before noon, then we hear loud noise, really tremendous noise, because you're talking about 10 or so humongous, the biggest helicopters that are coming at the same time.
As the refugees boarded the helicopters, Zung and his four sisters were separated from their parents. It was the first time any of them had ever been in an aircraft.
And I look down onto, as we rise above the Saigon, it looks very peaceful.
Aboard the USS Midway, Vern Jumper was busy directing helicopters to land on the flight deck.
A sailor would take a roll of line, rope, into the helicopter and take it to the end. Now hang on to this rope, and everybody would grab a spot on the rope, and he would take the end of the rope and lead the refugees off of the helicopter to be taken down on the hangar bay and processed, given food and water, and if they needed any medical care. It was very sad too. A lot of children and a lot of elderly people, and if you could put yourself in their situation, they're leaving their country and they had no idea where they were going, and you could see the sadness in their eyes.
Once we get on, we realize that, okay, so this is good. So we feel safe and sorrow and all kind of crazy things going on at the same time.
For nearly 30 hours, helicopters launched and landed, transporting more than 3,000 refugees to the Midway.
It was chaotic, I have to admit that, but it was controlled chaos. There were little kids running all over the flight deck and the hangar deck, and not one little kid went over the side. That in itself, to us, was a miracle.
Zung and his sisters were eventually reunited with their parents in Guam, where the family was processed and sent to Camp Pendleton. They lived in tents for several months until a church in Upland, California sponsored their large family and helped them rent a house there and buy a car. But Zung's father, who had worked as an accountant in Saigon and was the highest-ranking civilian in their home country, could not find a job. So Zung and his sister took a variety of jobs, and the family relied heavily on government assistance. Zung's father shuttled his children to and from community college, and eventually Zung found himself graduating from medical school as a pathologist. When you came to America, when you were a teenager, did you ever imagine that now this is where you'd be on the campus at UCSD working as a pathologist?
Well, it's unreal. It's unreal. Even after I've been here for 20 years, every time I walk down this corridor, it just seems unreal.
Today, Zung is married with 2 children of his own. His life is so very different from the one he left in Saigon. By many standards, he has lived the American dream. But like many refugees, he feels guilty for leaving his country behind.
Even now, 35 years later, I can still feel that, yeah, because I feel that, we were very lucky just to be here, but there's 40 million at that time. It was not so lucky. It really hurts. It really hurts when you think about your close friends. And then later on, when they heard that, when you heard that, they have to do this, do that, to survive, things like that, it's really, really, and it would never go away up until today. Every time when the April come around, and when we talk about the falls of Saigon, 35 years later, I spend more years here, but it's different. It's very different months for all of us when April comes around.